Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where by now you know we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And today I am delighted to introduce to you, I feel like you're a friend, Chloe, and I feel like, I met you on April 18th in Fargo when you were speaking at a Brave Conversations event sponsored by the North Dakota Humanities. And you talked about racism. Let's just lay it out there like that. And you
Yeah.
created a platform called Enchanted. We'll talk more about what that is. But before we get into the details of it, let me tell you, audience, who Chloe is. She's an entrepreneur. She developed the Theory of Enchantment. And as I tell you all these things Chloe's done, you're going to think she's like 50 years old. And she's not. She's done all this in a very short amount of time. She's an American writer, lecturer, and developer of the Theory of Enchantment. She spent a year as a Bartley Fellow at the Wall Street Journal. She's originally from New Orleans, but she now lives in Brooklyn. And her framework is for compassionate anti-racism that combines social, emotional learning, character development, and interpersonal growth as tools for leadership development in the boardroom and beyond. Chloe, thank you for being with me.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
We started talking offline before I started recording, and I was just saying to Chloe, so what can I ask you? What's off limits?
Yeah.
Can I ask you anything? And I asked her a question and she said, you might want to record. So so before we jump into that, Chloe, can you tell us a little bit about you, like how you got where you are, and then we'll get into the specifics. You're not
Sure.
old, so you've done a lot in a short amount of time.
Well, thank you. I need to hear that because sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough. So it's good. It's good perspective. So I'm from New Orleans. I'm from the South. I am 30 years old. I uh, went to the University of New Orleans where I majored in international studies with a concentration in conflict and diplomacy. I studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I afterwards developed the theory of enchantment in response to the fact that I wasn't seeing a framework specifically rooted in love uh, in direct response to the conflict. So I moved to New York a month after graduation. I worked at the Wall Street Journal for a year, and that was where I developed my thesis. And I was trying to figure out this question of how do we get people to love. And then I asked myself the question, well, what are people already in love with? And maybe that will show me how to love or to teach how to love. And from there, I said to myself, well, everyone's in love with pop culture. What are the pop culture brands that everyone's in love with? Disney, Nike, Beyonce, Apple. What's the common theme, story, motif, narrative that each of these brands are telling? Well, they're telling us a story of an imperfect, flawed human being who goes through a series of obstacles and ends up overcoming. And the Nike swoosh is like a talisman for that narrative. Disney films are, talisman for that narrative. When Beyonce says to run the world, girls, many women see themselves and their potential reflected in that.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, so basically these brands at their core are recognizing two important things about the human condition. Number one, we're imperfect, we're flawed, we make mistakes, we do all these things. And two, fundamentally, we are sacred. There's a kind of sacred reverence of the human being. And I grew up religious. I grew up in a religious home, so I am very familiar and comfortable in the language of the sacred, right? Of honoring the sacredness of all beings, but especially the human being. And so I developed a thesis with principles called the theory of enchantment. And enchantment, you could think of enchantment as the process by which you delight someone. And the process also by which you come to realize that everyone is sacred, right? That everyone has their own unique suchness and, and that needs to be honored and treated with reverence. And so there's three principles to the theory of enchantment. Treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy. And root everything you do in love and compassion. And these principles have practices that go along with them. And the idea is that if we show up in this way, we will successfully be able to meet the parts of ourselves that we traditionally or historically have not liked. We will be able to meet those parts with love. And once we're able to meet those parts with love, we will be able to direct love to others. We cannot direct love to the diversity of others if we have not met the diversity of our own selves with that same love. So that's the theory of enchantment.
That's such a great way to say it, because now when you say it that way, I don't know if it was an hour. Do you remember how long you spoke in Fargo? It was about an hour and a
I
half.
think it was about an hour, yeah. Like
Yeah.
maybe 90 minutes, yeah.
And you had such a great way of directing us to not only hear your content, but then to talk about it at our tables. And we had to do,
Yeah.
I don't say had to do, we were assigned to do some writing about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I've been kind of following your theory of enchantment, your enchanted games. What is it called? Enchanted
Oh,
games?
the Enchanted Games League, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I've been following that. You gave that to us as facilitators and had the opportunity to play in that space.
Mhm,
And it's all about self-reflection, which then leads
mhm.
to those places in us that might have been wounded or that need some love.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when you just said that now, I was reminded of, oh yeah, that's right. We went back and talked about ourselves. So the question I asked you off camera or off recording here was, often when we have conversations that end up being about race, because you talk a lot about racism, that's one of the areas that I learned so much from your presentation. I often, as a white person, by the way, if you're listening to the podcast, you may not know that I'm white and Chloe's black.
Mhm.
African American. Chloe, what's the right term? I don't even want to get in trouble.
I don't I think you're fine.
Okay, good. That's the stuff that I get so worried about saying the wrong things as a white
Sure.
person who doesn't understand my white privilege, that sometimes I feel worse about myself after I hear somebody
Mhm,
talk about a DEI topic. And
mhm,
I don't ever want to feel that way. So I avoid hard conversations because I might ask the wrong question. I might say something that I'm supposed to already know. And that's what I kind of asked you off camera. And you
mhm.
said, hit the recording.
So I think that any DEI program that makes its students, let's say, feel unsafe in asking questions or uh, worthless or less worthy than they felt before entering into the space is fundamentally the wrong program to be engaging.
Mhm.
There are many reasons for this. I mean, obviously, I talked about how important it is at the Theory of Enchantment to treat the human being with reverence and sacredness. But in addition to that, if we ask the question where superiority complexes come from anyway, like where does supremacy, what is supremacy? Supremacy is an overcompensation for feelings of worthlessness.
Right.
Because someone who is secure in themselves will not feel the need to tear another person down in order to feel good about themselves. Simply. So if a DEI program is is creating an environment where people are feeling shame or guilt or any other marker of less worthy, then they are actually creating fertile ground for supremacy
Mm, mm.
without realizing it.
Wow, that sheds a lot of light. This is what you did for me when I heard you speak too. It just shed a lot of light on things that have been scary topics. You know, you talked about white
Mhm.
supremacy. You shared an example of someone you knew who used to be a white supremacist and
Yeah,
changed.
yeah,
And I will never forget, you talked about the reason he changed is because everyone around him reflected love back to him, even when he wasn't feeling it for himself.
that's right.
And you talked about how that reflection of love can change anybody. And he was a great
That's
example of
right.
that. And
That's right.
I
Yeah.
remember you also talked about where racism might have been born. You talked about the
Yeah.
Enlightenment period, and you talked about how in your words, enchantment is different from enlightenment. Do you want to
Yes.
say a little
Well,
bit more about that?
sure. So I said how, racism didn't start with the Enlightenment, but the Enlightenment presents us with a particular way to understand how the psychology of racism emerged emerges, because the Enlightenment was a response to theological institutions in Europe claiming to have a monopoly on the truth. And philosophers and thinkers were saying, no, we're going to pursue the truth for ourselves. We want to know how the universe actually works. And out of this came a lot of great things, including, the scientific method and all things that are really, really important for us as a society. And simultaneously, what came out of it was this quest for certainty. And human beings in general, we are afraid of the unknown, right? So it's not like this is unique to, let's say, the West, quote unquote, but the way it manifested in Western civilization was fear of the unknown is the same as fear of darkness. And this also comes from, I didn't talk about this explicitly in the presentation. Fear of darkness is also deeply like religious fear that exists in our theological heritage as a civilization. And we associate darkness with evil. We associate darkness with corruption, right? We associate darkness with the bad, and we associate light with the good, with the pure, right? And so the Enlightenment, sort of in the word, is this valuing of the light over the dark. And the thing is, and you see this more reflected in other, like, let's say, Eastern wisdom traditions, but also esoteric interpretations of even our own Western traditions. The light and the dark depend on each other in order to exist. There is no darkness without light. There's no light without darkness. Wherever you're sitting, if you're listening to this or if you're watching this video, look around your room. Wherever you see shadow, there is light. Like it's baked into the fundamental reality of all existence. These two things depend upon each other in order to exist. And so there is no, there is no banishing of the darkness. There is no, and when you try to do that, and this is what happened in our own civilization, the psychological fear of the dark led to a projection, right? We projected darkness, which we should really simply hear as a synonym for the unknown, right? Neither good nor bad. It's just the unknown. And the light, neither good nor bad, just the known, right? But we projected the darkness, which we ourselves contain, onto the physically darker peoples of West Africa. So that is where race as a construct, that's how that emerged, right? I spoke about how the psychology is really, really important to understand, because if we just know the history without understanding the psychology, we won't be able to tackle it effectively.
That's a really great point right there. And I remember sitting in your audience and feeling that I was in a conversation. You were up in front and you were talking, and you were the presenter, yet I didn't feel talked down to. I didn't feel lectured at. I felt very included in the dialogue that you were having with us. And I can't even explain it, Chloe. That's why I went immediately up to you at stage and I said, there's something different about this and about you. And I was moved emotionally by who I felt I was in your presence. I know that sounds weird, but I think
that sounds like enchantment.
Okay, good. Awesome. Yay. And I don't experience that often in my physical life. I do virtually because there's a lot of opportunities virtually. But and not to say that I live in a place that doesn't have this, because it does. I live in a state where we only have 780,000 people in the whole state, and it's a huge state geographically. So by sheer numbers, we're probably not going to have the opportunity to connect with people on this kind of level as much as I might if there were just a greater number of people. So that's probably why I felt the way I felt with you. We don't have these conversations in my world very often. Diversity, equity, inclusion in North Dakota, we don't have a ton. of at least racial diversity. We have some, but not a ton. And so we don't really, this is me speaking for me right now, we don't really know how to be in that space if we're not connecting at that place where we both come together in love, which is what you talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think your work doesn't feel to me like DEI. We have to check it off the
Right.
list that we did this training. Even though you've done training, I would call it training with Harvard, ByteDance, Providence Health, Federal Aviation Association. You've been part of bringing these ideas into what 220,000 people at Providence Health, 48,000 at the Federal Aviation Association. And I asked you when I met you, so how big is your staff, Chloe? How do you do this? And you told me what?
We're about 5 people now.
5 people are doing this work with these huge
Yeah.
organizations. So how do they find you, Chloe? How do you do that, the logistics of this work? Because it's so important.
Well, just to be clear, it's true that those organizations have thousands of people in the organizations, but when we work with them, we're usually working with departments on a smaller scale. So just to clarify that. But they often find us honestly through platforms like this. They hear about us on podcasts. They, hear about us through word of mouth. They hear about us from colleagues at other similar companies that then tell them about us. We're actually trying to really get tighter on finding, more partners that we can service. It's something that is a challenge for every entrepreneur. And we want to upscale the amount of partners that we have and we're in constant, conversation with and partnership with. But they find us primarily podcasts, articles, word of mouth, social media, things like that.
And they have their own testimonial to share, which probably carries a lot of weight with these organizations, right? Because
For sure. Yeah.
their testimonials on your website are amazing. I mean, we learned things like, how to, well, you have it said, increase employee well-being, align with the law. There's a whole legal thing here.
It's not illegal to do it.
No.
Which is important because some so-called DEI programs are basically illegal, right?
Oh, wow.
Because they're in violation of civil rights law in the sense that they do encourage you to prejudge people based upon their skin color. And there have been numerous lawsuits as a result of that.
They have you prejudge people based on the color of their skin. That's fascinating to me. That's just the opposite, isn't it, of what it was supposed to do?
Correct.
Huh. Interesting.
Well, think about it. Like if you're teaching me, if you're a DEI facilitator and you're teaching me that as soon as you see a white person, put them into this box in your mind of privileged oppressor, I'm prejudging you based on your skin color. And I'm reducing the fullness of your humanity to a very small box and easy heuristic to organize my world. And you scale that up and you have the recipe for disaster, in fact.
Did you said you studied the Palestinian, you studied that in college, right? That was your.
Yeah.
Did you always have this interest? Did you always want to know more about this, or did this come because of your college studies?
When you say this, what are you referring to?
The humanity of human beings, despite the outward appearances of them. Were you always interested in sociology and psychology?
I had a really good education and like in general, and like in elementary and high school, I had a diversity of educational experiences actually. But when I was 14 years old, I saw the movie Freedom Riders. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I know of it. I haven't.
Oh, it's very good. So I saw that at an impressionable young age. And it's about this teacher who changes the lives of her students who all come from different backgrounds and are of all different races and belong to like race-based gangs in LA and who totally hate each other and want to kill each other. And they're like in 10th grade. And she totally transforms their life, and she makes them realize that they have worth, and she makes them realize that they should love themselves, and she teaches them to love themselves. And by teaching them to do that in community, they end up really loving each other. And when I saw that when I was 14 years old, I was like, oh, she's a magician.
Mm.
I want to do that. That's what I want to do. Like, what she was doing was magic, right? Erin Gruwell is the name of the teacher.
Okay.
Like, that's magic right there. So that, I would say, was like the early seed that was planted in my adolescence.
Well, and I think you and I would share. I've just never had the way to articulate it the way you have articulated it. The humanity, the piece of humanity that goes beyond any physical appearance or any historical appearance, I suppose, or the history of us. I love that you said if you're looking at somebody and putting them in a box or a container based on supremacy or non-supremacy, you're not ever seeing that human as a human. And I hadn't thought of it.
And I want to clarify something. I said this in the presentation yesterday, actually. So as human beings, we're capable of the full range, right, of what it means to be human. We can do good, we can do bad, we suffer, we experience joy, anger, so on and so forth. And one of the things we do is we put people into boxes, right? And we stereotype people. And the theory of enchantment suggests that the proper orientation or the proper response to recognizing this fact in yourself or about yourself, and this is probably distinct from a lot of the other DEI programs out there, the proper response is actually to give thanks for all of it, right? Remember we did the who am I practice where you ask yourself, who am I? And you say thank you, and for everything, whether good or bad, say thank you. So there's a real practice of gratitude that the theory of enchantment encourages all of its participants to practice. And that's really important. And this is in part inspired by a lot of my study of Eastern wisdom traditions, including Taoism and Buddhism. In Buddhism in particular, if you can basically be with what is, if you can accept what is, then what is will change. Because change is the nature of reality itself. But if what in Buddhism is called clinging, and clinging, the English language is sort of incapable of fully capturing what is meant here. But clinging can come in the form of like really, really, really wanting to hold on to an experience, or really, 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 really being averse to an experience, right? That is happening presently. So for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say you and I are engaged in conversation, and for whatever reason, there's a part of me that feels contempt towards you right now. If my mind ruminates and starts to feel guilty or shame because I feel this way, I will feel this way for a while. However, if I can get really present and really still and accept that feeling is present within me, it's not the only feeling that's present with me, then that feeling will pass. And so in that same way, if you find yourself stereotyping someone, right? You like notice it. You notice that you're stereotyping someone. If you can, in that moment, simply accept the fact that there's a part of you that stereotypes someone, then that feeling will pass. It's the act of acceptance that actually enables the thing to pass. Because Carl Jung, famous psychiatrist from the 20th century, taught us that every part that you do not love about yourself will rebel against you, essentially. Every part that you do not accept within yourself will metastasize. And this is what I mean by accepting your own darkness, right? Accepting your own baggage, accepting the things that you don't like about yourself. And also the things that you felt to take responsibility for yourself. Famously, in Jungian work, darkness is not darkness is not bad, or doesn't merely contain the quote unquote bad. It
Mm.
actually contains a great deal of potential, energy, talent, etc. But if you're constantly shunning it and you're constantly shaming it, it will metastasize and it will rebel against you. And
Mm.
you will end up projecting it outward onto
Mm.
onto others.
I wish I knew what to ask you. I wish I knew what to these are the kinds of conversations on this podcast, Get Real. Um, I want to have more of. You're going to be
Yeah.
episode number 216, I think.
Oh,
And
cool.
right, and we talk about these things because getting real means getting radical, energized, authentic, and learning focused. And
Mhm.
radical does not mean crazy radicalized like we've made it
Yeah.
mean these days. It means getting back to the root of what
Yeah.
actually makes us us. And what you've
Yeah.
just described is the way I would describe radical. And
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
know how many regular people who are doing their best to make the life they want to live actually have these kinds of conversations. And
Hmm.
the way you've just broken that down was very simple. You didn't take a whole lot of time to do it. We've only been talking for 30 minutes. You've really helped shed some light on an issue, a topic that can be really one that we want to avoid.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
could you tell me a little bit about your work in, let's just start with corporations,
Sure.
organizations that have a lot of people working in them, how your work has impacted some of these clients that you've worked with, Harvard, ByteDance, Providence Health, Federal Aviation. Could you talk a little bit about that? What have they seen? What have they noticed?
Sure. So some of the subtle changes in the organizations that have come out of their partnering with us is they have a toolkit of resources to reach for whenever they experience conflict in the workplace. And conflict is inevitable, it's part of life. Whether it's conflict with a manager, conflict with a customer, conflict with a colleague, are you able to, I saw this online, it's like hear without the filter of your wound. Right.
Mm.
So if you are engaging in something like the Enchanted Games League or our online course or any of our other practice-oriented modalities, you are being exposed for a certain period of time to a habit of mind that is reflective. And if you do it over and over and over again, then it will start to scaffold into when you're engaging with customers, managers, colleagues, etc. So, for example, if a customer comes to you and is super irate and aggressive because they want you to solve a problem, instead of personalizing the aggression and internalizing the aggression, we've had managers respond to the pain point
Mm.
directly. And that has shifted the way, like the trajectory of the conversation entirely between that customer and that manager, where the customer was like apologizing for how they showed up and like, asking, returning the favor in the sense of asking how their day was going. And it that over time, if you could create a team of people who are showing up in that way, who are able to meet their customers on that level, or their colleagues, their managers, etc., that's like a totally different breed of an organization,
Mm.
right? So I would say by and large, that is a good summary of the change over time that takes place within an organization, of team members who can show up in that way, because they that creates psychological safety, that creates a space where people can make mistakes and feel like they're not going to be penalized for making mistakes, which is really important when you're trying to develop new products and services to meet the needs of your customers. It creates the ecosystem that actually feels like a space of belonging, right? And it is in that ecosystem that your employees will thrive, that your employees will come to work every day and feel like they're able to actually make a difference, again, take risks, make mistakes, and be able to produce incredible products and services that move the needle, or that fulfill whatever the mission of the company is.
That's such a different way of looking at, I'm going to put up air quotes for those of you who can't see it, DEI programs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're talking about is human. You're not talking about race. You're not talking about religion. You're not talking about upbringing or anything. You're talking about humanity and conflict. I live in the land of Minnesota nice. We avoid conflict at all costs, right? You're on the East
Mhm.
now. So on the East, they're much better at addressing things from what I understand about the East Coast.
Yeah,
But what I love that you said it's so that people feel a sense of belonging to this organization, belonging in the world, perhaps could be. If
yeah,
people want more about this, I'm going to jump in here to kind of plant the seed as in this conversation. You have so many great things on your website that will show people why the Enchanted Games League would be something they would want to consider. You could
yeah,
pick a situation, pick a pain point, and you probably
yeah,
have something that addresses it. Could you talk about how, I know you've talked about this being a game, and you
yeah,
mentioned Duolingo as a way of kind of giving some context to why we have to do this over and over again. Could you talk
yeah.
a little bit more about the practice of the work we're talking about?
Sure. So the Enchanted Games League, which you've been a part of, is something that we offer business teams to put their employees through a game for 9 weeks where they log in every day and they engage a 6-minute quest or, 2 3-minute quests. And the quests are introspective questions that they are asked to answer, and they're in it with their colleagues. So they answer and then they see their colleagues' answers as well, which creates a sense of community, camaraderie, so on and so forth. The questions, like I said, are reflective questions. They include questions like, write about a time you felt expansive and a time you felt defensive. What were the differences between those two feelings? Write about a time you felt superior to another human being. What was that like? Write about a time you saw a human being as a symbol or group of people as a symbol for either good or bad, not as actual human beings. Write about a mindset you got from your caretaker that you'd like to keep and that you'd like to get rid of. So they're space, they're repetitive. What they do in the because they're repetitive, what they do is that they reveal to the user that they're constantly changing over time, right? Like in fact, I take for granted how many mindsets I got from my caretakers that I like to keep and that I'd like to get rid of.
Mm.
But by answering that question repeatedly over time, I realized how deeply embedded my world is. Like I didn't give myself my name. Um,
Mm.
it is a matter of chance that I was born where I was born, right, in the family that I was born in, so on and so forth. All things are interconnected.
Mm.
Another thing that it engenders this game is if you get used to if you answer the question every day, which is how it is optimally played. If you answer the question every day, then you get more comfortable living in the question,
Mhm.
right? And if you can get more comfortable living in the question, it's essentially getting more comfortable with living in the unknown, right?
Mhm.
Getting more comfortable with living in the darkness.
Yeah, yeah.
Getting more uncomfortable, or excuse me, getting more comfortable with your own darkness, right?
Mhm.
And so what that does, and you're doing it with other colleagues who are also becoming more comfortable living the darkness or being with, I would say, the darkness.
Yeah.
And and so that is like we took a page out of Duolingo's model to really try and figure out how to do like habit-based learning over time. They're really good, obviously, with their language learning
Mhm.
approach and
Mhm.
how they've built that. And our dream is to eventually be able to create an experience that is on that level, right? With the full sweep of animation and, just like that they're performing at the highest level. And we want to get there eventually
Yeah,
as well. But yeah, that's a little bit about the gamification.
I love that. And I love that you alluded to your vision. Um, what will the world be like when you have made the impact you feel you're here to make? You personally, Chloe Valdary.
Well, I don't know that I'm just going to answer the question. I was going to say something, but it will look like when people find themselves in conflict with each other, they will be more inclined to pause and to articulate what's going on for them internally, to ask the person that they're in conflict with, what do they think about that?
Mhm.
And the other person will also be inclined to respond accordingly. That totally changes the nature and the culture of conflict in a way that is more integrated, holistic, and solvable
Mhm. Mhm.
ultimately.
Well, to me, that brings out of the darkness into the light. It would be like being in a big warehouse where all the lights are off and you have no idea what's in there. And
Yeah,
unless you turn on the light, you can't see anything or
yeah,
bring an item out into, open the door and so that you can actually
yeah,
see what it is. And in that way, the whole in enchantment, enlightenment, we can call it. I like that what you said about enlightenment being only about the light, and we need to really embrace
mhm,
both the light and the darkness. And in this way, it sounds to me like in your world and mine too, I'm going to say that would be a super world to live in. We wouldn't
mhm,
be afraid. We wouldn't be afraid of what we don't
yeah,
know. We would be
right,
willing to give space to the truth of each of us. And in that
yeah,
space where we bring it out and can look at it objectively, it feels like you said earlier, it goes away as we continue
yeah,
to look at
yeah. It changes, it passes, it
it. Mhm,
moves, and
mhm,
everything is moving.
mhm,
Everything is alive. Everything is singing. There's
mhm,
also a beautiful connection between enchantment and singing. Like, cantar and encanto actually means song in other languages, in Spanish and such. And there's a musicality, there's a poetry to the
mhm,
theory of enchantment
mhm,
that is implicit, perhaps deeply embedded. Um, but it goes back to being able to recognize that sacredness of every human being, because every human being is singing their own unique song. And if we can like tune in, and we just released a product called Tuning Fork actually a
nice.
few weeks ago, to this point. But if we could tune in, if we could attune our ears such that we could be able to hear that,
Mhm,
then yeah, we would be less afraid.
yeah. I've been studying Think and Grow Rich for many years, and
Mm.
we're talking about vibration, energy, and frequency in
Mm.
the terms of the 1920s and what was happening in
Mm.
the world then. And really, if we understand vibration, frequency, and energy, we really can have it pretty much, not figured out, but to your point about the tuning fork and about attraction and all of those crazy laws that are true, are really universal laws, we're not fighting against anything, we're working with them.
Yeah,
And that's where I see
well said.
a lot of possibility and a lot of opportunity for the humans, not just the resources in an organization, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Chloe, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you and wanted to find out more, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You can visit our website, theoryoфenchantment.com. If you're a business and you know you want to work with us, email our admin at info@theoryofenchantment.com with the subject line "Want to work with you." If you are a individual consumer and you want to engage in a habit-based practice, you can check out Dojo. Dojo is a product we released on MLK Day this year. We're very similar to the EGL. It's a subscription-based uh, product. You get a quest per day, and you engage in that quest, and you see other people engaging in the quest. Enchanteddojo.com. There's two D's there, so don't forget the second D.
Okay.
Enchanteddojo.com for that. And then if you want a more like shallow dive, then go to enchantedtune.com for Tuning Fork, which is like daily 90-second meditations that you can
Mm,
listen to.
nice. What do you need, Chloe? What do you personally need? If you could identify something for you that would help you um, continue to be able to do the work you're doing without interference.
More clients.
Okay. Corporate,
um,
individual.
I mean, the more of each, the merrier.
Okay.
You know, I would say my priority would be more corporate clients. Yes.
Mhm.
Um, I also want to figure out a way to bring singing into the theory of enchantment, because I love to sing and I love to produce music on my own time, and I also love to chant. Theory of Enchantment. So
Mhm, mhm.
to bring that more uh embodiedness into, I was really, really moved by the fact of how the event was initiated. I don't know if you
Our event.
remember.
Yes, yes, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. How our
Tell us
event
about
was
that.
beautiful.
Tell our audience about how it started. And this is our North Dakota event that happened in April that Chloe was the speaker for.
Yes, unfortunately, I forgot the gentleman's name, but a
Uh,
member of. Do you remember his name?
yeah, I do. I'm gonna pull it out. White was his last name, I believe. Was it Randy?
No.
I'll find it out and we'll put it in here. I'll stick it in this space. But he's from not a Ojibwe tribe, but he's from a tribe in North Dakota. And
Yes, and he started with a I don't know what the technical term for it is actually, but it was a ceremony. Basically, it's a
mhm,
song ceremony.
mhm,
Like that's how he started
mhm.
the 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 evening, and it was awesome. It was like perfect. Like
Mm.
I want all Theory of Enchantment things to start like that. To start with a chant. It was essentially a chant, right?
Was.
Like that's
Mhm,
precisely
mhm.
what I want all of the in person things to start with, and that was awesome.
Did you plan that? Did you know?
No, I had no idea that that was even happening.
Oh, really?
No
That's
idea. That was
and he,
awesome. It was like perfect. It was like hitting the proper chord, you know, it was
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so good. There are so many places we could go, Chloe, and I fully intend that we will stay connected because I have a whole lot of ideas and support I'd like to give to you for the work you're doing in the world. I'm at the end of my career, you're toward the beginning of yours, so I just really want to support everything you're doing because this is why this podcast exists, to be real and to get into
Yeah.
that space where it's not so scary to have those conversations that matter, that truly matter with the
Yeah.
people who matter. And I always say that's everybody. That's everybody who wants to engage. They're the people who matter.
Yeah.
And I just thank you for being that person for me today on this podcast and for being so generous with your time and attention that night when I met you. It was just
Oh
fabulous.
yes. My pleasure, Jody. It's a real pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. So please reach out to Chloe, anybody who feels called to do that. If there's anything just stirring in you that you're like, I want more information, she's got so many resources I'll make available in the show notes. And as always, everybody, just go get real. I'll talk to you again. So I'm going to stop recording, Chloe, and then I want to tell you something. Yeah.